Managing Violence Podcast, Season 6, Episode 6, with the founder of Savage Hybrid Combat, Savannah Archambault. There is a language warning and a trigger warning on this episode.
Rape happens in public place. It really does. When that happened, it was in a bathroom cubicle from like a bar. And one of the girls that was with her, she accused me of being a slut. You know, like, well, if you don't want to, I'm sorry, I'm going to use your word. If you don't want to fuck someone, then you shouldn't act like such a whore.
Managing Violence Podcast is brought to you by Australian Warfighters Coffee. Now, as you guys know, I interview guests from all over the world, which means that I'm quite frequently working on the show either very early in the morning or very late at night. So between a full-time job, an unusual schedule, and 4 children, I consume a lot of coffee. And given that I live in the coffee capital of Australia, I can be a little bit picky with what I choose to consume for my caffeine, depending on what's available at the time and how urgently I need it. But Australian Warfighters Coffee not only make a top-notch blend, but they also give back to the Australian veteran community by investing in training, education, and employment for our Aussie troops. So we'd like you to support those that support us, and in turn help Aussie veterans with the transition into civvy life. Check out www.australianwarfighters.com to find out more or to purchase their epic coffee. As we welcome them into the team, into the tribe of the Managing Violence podcast. If any of our listeners out there purchase anything from AustralianWarfighters.com, send me your receipt to joe@joesaunders.com.au and I will send you an Australian Warfighters Velcro patch to throw on your gear and rep the brand publicly. We thank them for their service and for supporting the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Managing Violence podcast. Joe Saunders here with you once again. Quick shout out before we start to our newest Patreon contributor, Paul Korchak. Paul just joined the Tribal Council, and as a result, he'll be getting a bunch of perks. If you're interested in more perks and bonus content from each and every episode, make sure you check out www.patreon.com/managingviolence. Join the tribe. Get rewarded. All right, today, my guest is Savannah Archambault from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Savannah is a martial arts and self-defense instructor. She grew up as a military brat. She was trained under the legendary Kevin Secours, who many of you will be familiar with. And look, I have been asked several times over the past couple of years we've been doing this show, why don't you have more women on the show? We need more female voices. I've tried to rectify that, and this is another step in that direction. Certainly more than happy to have more women on the show, and I think this is an incredibly valuable episode because Savannah really not just busts some myths, but she cracks those myths over their head with a solid object and makes them bleed all over the floor. There's a lot we talk about that probably goes against conventional wisdom when it comes to how women's self-defense is taught. And it is quite interesting getting her perspective as a young female in this industry, which is essentially still a male-dominated industry. And some of her struggles, some of her successes, some of the things that she's excelled at, and some of the things she's struggled with, but also her own journey as a human being a survivor of sexual assault and rape, and how that has coloured her teaching and also her journey through recovery. There's a lot to unpack. I had a great time chatting with Savannah, and I encourage you to follow her on all her social media. She's very active out there. But for now, here is the one and only founder of Savage Hybrid Combat, Savannah Archambault. All right, I'm joined here by Savannah Archambault, who is a self-defense instructor based in Montreal. Savannah, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It was overdue, definitely.
Yes, yeah, we had this conversation in December last year, so December 2019 for those that are listening in the future. And we had a scheduling conflict, something didn't work out at the time, and here we are in August 2020, finally making it happen. So
finally.
Persistence pays off. So Savannah, let's start at the very beginning. What was your introduction to self-defense? How did you get started in this field?
Actually, my dream goal in life was to work in public security. So as a army brat, I was hoping to get into the army at some point. Even if my father was totally against it, at some point he actually came up to like the idea a bit more because he saw that I was, a pretty strong kid, pretty independent and everything. So at some point he started even encouraging me towards that direction, and it just, made me want it even more. But then I start the process, and sadly, when it came to the medical aspect, it didn't pass. And then after that, I tried to go for police, but the same thing happened. So I passed the writing exam, the physical exam, but when we got to, again, medical stuff, it didn't work out because I actually have a lot of like health issues, bone issues, and stuff like that. And since they will be the one to have to kind of deal with that in the future if they accepted me, it's sadly not something that they are really into, right?
Yeah.
So because of that, I started instead more going into security management. I went to university and all that, but then quickly I noticed that there was no physical part to it. It was really for office jobs.
Yes.
So when I saw that, I started looking around. And at the time, I wasn't yet in Montreal. I was in around that area, which is a bit more like smaller villages and all that. And of course, there was like martial arts places. I tried a few. It didn't work out for me. There was always something missing. And before going to Montreal, I tried a few self-defense stuff because it was a bit more free to me. They were trying to include a bit more stuff, but again, when I got into the real world, if I can say, if I start, being in Montreal, and it's not the same. Being in a village where everyone knows each other, to move to Montreal and on my own, and I was pretty young, and even then, just walking in the street, it was totally different atmosphere. So then I tried looking around for more combative military stuff, and that's how I started. And one day I just found the right place, and I just fall in love with it all. The whole combative aspect, the ground, the boxing, the weapons, everything. So, and for me, that was really it. And this is where also I saw that for a first time that I kind of wanted something on my own. So it wasn't just for job purposes anymore. It was actually for personal reasons too.
So it sounds like we probably have something in common because I always wanted to serve as well, and whether it was military or policing, and for me, what that was an urge to protect people, and I've always had that sort of urge to, I guess, to be on the front line and to put myself in harm's way is to protect others. It felt like if someone has to be there, then it should be me. That was my sort of attitude, and it sounds like that's very much your attitude too, because you went through the same process of wanting to serve, couldn't get in for various reasons, but you found a way to use your skills or to, I guess, to make yourself into that sheepdog as well.
Yeah, exactly. You just like I had to find a way around it. It just wasn't. It wasn't an option to not be in that domain somehow.
So one of the things I'm really interested about is, I've had a few people message me over the last couple of years saying, when are you going to have more women on the show? And I would love to. My answer is I would love to, but it's hard to find women in the self-defense community, and I'm sure I'm sure I'll get some flack for this, but it's hard to find women in the self-defense community that are talking about these topics publicly. And that's how I first came across you and why I reached out to you originally, because you're one of the few that were posting about things that I could tell you got it. You really got it. You weren't trying to sell a glorified Tybo or trying to sell fitness. You were trying to sell self-defense. And obviously, if you've listened to other episodes of the show, you know I think fitness is essential for self-defense, but you know what I'm talking about. Just had to put the disclaimer there before I get into trolls. So I'd just like to explore what was your journey from finding this school, falling in love with it, and then becoming an instructor. How did that happen?
So I ended up in a martial arts school that had a really good base on more military stuff. And obviously, when I went there, most of the practitioners were males, right? And truth be told, when I got there, I already have lived through a lot of abuse and trauma and everything. But the thing is that I'm the kind of person who, let's just say, if I have a tendency towards, I'm going to use the word victimization or maybe more anger, I'm definitely towards the anger side. So I went there, and again, I think even the first week it was only males, and I just totally went into it. I went there every night for the whole hours, and it was just at first I never actually really planned it on. Not that I didn't want to be an instructor, but it at this point it was really just for myself. I've been kind of rejected to so many places, and so many other places didn't work out for me, that I was just there mostly for myself. And uh, so I didn't mind training with males, and I was quite aggressive for being the only girl. So if there was any other girl, I could see the difference right away. Even the teacher and the other student, I was literally treating like a man. Like I was being punched right in the face. Even though probably at first some of them were like, oh, she's pretty, blah blah blah, whatever. And when they saw that, I don't want to say that I wasn't even trying to be pleasant, but again, I wasn't there to actually make friends. I was there to actually kind of try to overcome certain things. And again, my approach maybe was a bit aggressive at that time. And more and more I worked with people, and it just, I just learned so much for myself, and it just felt so good that at some point I had to leave, and I moved back to more villages place, and I changed work and whatever. The schedule wasn't working, and it really, really, really hit me hard that I needed to leave that dojo. It really badly affected me, and I really felt lost as a student. But then I started remembering, that my mentor always kind of invited me to do more. Even when I was there, uh, when we will have tests or some stuff like that, he will sometimes ask me to show the stuff to the people. And when I moved to another dojo, from a guy that was a student from that mentor, that guy, I guess I was lucky in a sense, because he invited me to start teaching with him, for him, but of course for women's self-defense, but still that helped. And I could still see that, for me, it wasn't something really common, because again, I was just surrounded with women. And even in my daily life, it's not something that I'm used to. I have much more male friends than females. And again, even in my training, I was used to a bit more testosterone, let's say. So at some point, I also left that place because I went back to Montreal and everything. But it still gave me that little taste of teaching and that desire to actually share with people, because I'll be totally honest, yes, I made some people cry because again, I'm a military brat, so I'm really rough in my teaching. I expect a lot from people, and I've been raised in a way that if I do something slightly bad, not perfectly, I'm gonna be told. Like my dad, my mentor, everybody will point it out to me. And if I did something right, he will just look at me and no, and that was it. So in my teaching, I had to work. If one good thing that teaching women brought me, it was maybe a bit more sensitivity towards that. But still, when I went on my own and create my own business and tried to do more private, it was really important to me to show that I could actually also teach men. So I started doing private, mostly at home, like in my place. Instead of having a normal couch and a TV in my living room, I have tatami on the ground and training equipment. So it was really, again, about um, uh, again, a bit maybe that feeling of, you know, rejection and everything, and having to change from one place to another, that I didn't have the choice to become my own teacher. And then when I saw from experimenting with different people, both as a student but also as a teacher, it really showed me that, considering everything that I've been through, I'm actually dealing with it pretty well. And obviously, I think it has something to do with the way that I'm coping things. And one thing that I've really noticed is that, again, we can do generalization about women's self-defense, but sadly, I feel like there's a they welcome the victimization a bit too much. So yes, I had to get a bit softer, but I feel like my tougher side was definitely something that was missing in a lot of other teachers, especially those who teach women self-defense. So that's actually, considering that this is not what I necessarily want to do with my life, like I'm gonna accept a contract for women self-defense places, I still want to do all gender, all age, and everything. And I think that that first experience as a teacher for exclusively women is actually the thing that I was like, no, I think I have something to actually give to the world, if it's just a presence as a woman that can teach men. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So one thing I am really interested in, and I think could add a lot of value, given our listener base. Look, most of our listeners are male, but there are quite a few that are teaching self-defense in some form or another, either in traditional martial arts, policing, military, or other areas. I'd really like, before we get into your approach as an instructor, talk us through that experience as a female student, because I think that retention of students with women is actually lower than retention with men. I think that's largely because most instructors are male. We are sometimes a little bit awkward about how do we teach women? What do they want? What do they need? What support systems need to be in place or don't need to be in place? I know, like when I first met my wife, she started training with me, and the club that I was training at, she felt quite uncomfortable with, because not because things were rough, but actually the opposite. That when the men were training with her, they were really not going hard enough or fast enough, and she felt like she was being babied almost, because they didn't want to hurt her. Partly because she was my girlfriend, I guess, but partly also because she was new and she was a woman, and she was like 19, 20 years old. So, and she didn't have any physical background. So I think everyone was being very soft with her, and she, after a little while, she got frustrated with that because she wanted to train like everybody else. And then I think there's other instructors that don't take into account that a lot of their female students don't have an athletic background, or maybe haven't grown up with rough and tumble contact with older brothers or whatever. So, and the training is too confrontational. So, what advice would you give, I guess, from a student's point of view, as a female student, to make that more effective for the instructor?
Yeah, well, I guess there could be 2 points to that, and which is basically the equivalent of, you know, how I will teach a women's self-defense program. First, I think that people need to understand that it actually doesn't matter what the gender is. I understand that, you know, even in society today, we are still being very much raised and kind of put into categories depending on whether you're female or male. And you can see it, like you go in, you know, any MMA shop, you see that they do boxing glove for women in pink. they do geese in pink, you know, as if it kind of take for granted that because you're a woman, you want your stuff in pink. And it's the same thing once you get to the dojo, you know. And some women obviously are like me or your wife, and to begin with, we are already ready to kind of be ideally treated as equally as anyone, which is usually males, right? And I think it's important to understand that that exactly, you know, we're the same. We're still a human being, and it shouldn't be based on the gender, but more on the psychological state of the person and their size. You know, people who say that size doesn't matter, I can tell you something. Having someone double my size on me versus triple my size, I'm gonna feel the difference. I will. Whether it is in training or in real life, it does matter. It really does. But the reality also is that a guy, because I'm a pretty massive woman. I'm a bit taller than average. I have a good muscle. I train a lot and everything. So technically, I can be pretty much the same weight as a guy my size, or relatively smaller. And so, you know, that guy who is smaller than me or at the same weight is going to be needing basically the same thing as I do, because it's not what he has between his leg that matter. It's really the height and the weight and everything else. So I think that should be one thing that we understand first, is that it's not about the gender, it's really about the size. And secondly, again, the mental state. So again, as I mentioned, you know, I do see the benefits in woman self-defense kind of atmosphere as a first step to recovery when you're someone that has been through trauma or abuse and everything. It's okay and it's normal if that person needs to go there. But at the end of the day, you should be able to grow out of that and get to the next level, which is training, which basically, you know, the size and the weight that is threatening to you, right? So I think as an instructor, to understand that could help. For example, a male instructor to teach a female student, because it's to remind ourselves that, you know, being kind, soft on someone who is trying to learn to defend himself is not going to help them. It's like, you know, a not so good partner in training is not going to help their partner get better. You know, it's important, even when we look at topics such as knife defense, you actually need to learn how to attack with a knife if you want to learn how to defend from it. Because if you can't properly attack your partner with a knife, they can't properly learn how to defend from it. So it's the same thing about the size and the mental state and everything. But also, I think there's another aspect to it, in the sense that, yes, it matters how the teacher reacts towards the student, but also, I gotta be honest, there was another reason why I was being treated like a little, you know, a boy compared to my other fellow female student with me. Sad to say, they acted like princess, you know. So, and again, it's okay if you're comfortable with having like princess student and everything, and you still welcome them and you still want to train them. But it's at this point, it's your choice as a teacher to decide what you want to do with them, what kind of crew you want to have. I think that's also really important, because, you know, if someone showed up saying, well, I want to learn to defend myself against that kind of situation, then they act like princess. I'm sorry to say this, you need to break that. Like, it's because once they go back to the real world with a real, you know, rapist in front of them, acting like a princess will definitely not help them. If anything, it would just encourage them to still, you know, be victimized and stuff like that. So I think it's really just to kind of try to realize as an instructor that being kind of them or whatever is not what's going to help them. It's like any MMA coach. If you don't accept to punch your student once in a while in the face, he's not going to learn how to take it, and it's not going to work out. So it's the same thing, I think, with a female.
Yeah, I think you make so many really good points there about the size of the person and their and I guess their physicality probably dictates more than what their gender does, but also I think we stereotype, or we typecast why people are doing self-defense, and I think it's very easy to say, well, most men start self-defense mostly not because they've been victimized, but because they want to be a badass. Yeah, like they want to be an action movie star. They want to be an MMA fighter, or they want to be tough, big, strong. That's the male archetype, and we sort of assume, I think, especially from a male point of view, that most women who join are joining because they want to learn how to defend themselves because they're scared. And I think there's probably a portion of both genders where the opposite is true. There's men that are joining self-defense or martial arts because they have been bullied, or because they've been victimized by violent crime, and they don't feel comfortable with their ability to stand up for themselves. And I think for men, that can be a really big issue with their psychology of feeling like they're less of a man if they can't defend themselves. And I think for women, then there's the opposite, where there's women like you who want to be badass. They want to be they want to be all things, and don't. You didn't show up because you had a bad breakup. Like it was something that you wanted to do for yourself. And I think that's super important, because the different motivations and the psychology of the student matters so much more than what their gender is. And I think sometimes we can get it wrong, because we take that slightly more fragile male student and we throw them to the wolves because we think that's what they want, or we take the more dominant female student and we treat them like a princess, and they hate that as well.
Yeah, no, totally. It's especially when I started, most of the male students that I had were all actually men that had been through abuse. I literally had a student that half of his face was completely shut off. So he was blind from one eye. He was, that side of his mouth couldn't move at all because he'd been attacked, and he basically lost half of his face ability, And that's the thing. He was a big guy. He was a super big guy, but still, his emotional state made it impossible for him to train with other people. And he probably tried to go to a male coach and whatever, and it just didn't work out for him, because they were too rough and everything. And maybe they even thought that, oh my God, you got that. He's so he's so cool. You've been through stuff, when actually that poor man was broken. So no, definitely the mental state and the goals of your students is as important as how the teacher is going to teach his class, because you can force a lazy person to go to be full out throughout the 1 hour class. They're always going to find excuse. They're always going to be speaking and talking to the partner or whatever. My knee hurts or whatever. I've seen people in literally all wrapped up in bandages and whatever, and they were still training. In the end, it's not only, how can I say this, if a student is treated a certain way, it's not completely the teacher's fault. It's also it's like any relationship, it goes both ways. So if you're being a princess and the teacher accepts it and let you act like a princess, and you like that attention, well, you're gonna stay a princess, right? And if you have a certain ego as a male and your teacher doesn't break it down to you, well, you're still gonna be full of ego. So
yeah it's interesting. When I started teaching self-defense, I started off teaching. I was a bouncer, and I started teaching other bouncers, and that's fine because they're my people, and they're mostly the same size as me. I mean, I'm 6'3", 120 kilograms, so I'm a big guy, And when you're training other, I guess, larger, physically robust people, you can train in a certain way. And it frustrated me when I started teaching, quote unquote, regular people. And especially when I started teaching women that weren't from that security world, that they would say, of course it works for you. You're huge, right? It's like they didn't believe the technique because they didn't think they could do it because they were smaller than me, or they didn't have the experience I did, or they didn't have the skills I did. And that frustrated me because I was like, man, if only I was smaller, like I could, they would believe me. But that was partly my ego as well, because I wasn't seeing things through their lens. Yeah, I had only lived the experience of being a large physical male. Like that was my experience. And it took me several years before I really started to realize that the reality of being a 5'5" average size female is completely different
Yeah,
to
no.
to my reality. And there are things that wouldn't work for them. And I guess I understood that on a practical level. But when we're talking about self-defense, like just the idea of being fearful, that especially once I had daughters, I started to realize this, and I started to actually listen. I guess maybe I was more willing to listen to the realities and the experiences that a lot of the women in my life were sharing about. Men don't walk out of the house fearful, right? We don't go walking down the street or go into a nightclub worrying that someone's going to rape us. Like that's not something that occurs to us. Well, I won't say to us. I'll say to most men. Obviously, if you've had experience with trauma and abuse, it may be different. But for most men, it's not a concern, right? We think if there's going to be any sort of threat to our safety, it's probably going to be a social interaction that goes badly, and there's going to be a testosterone battle, and that's pretty much going to be the extent of it. It's probably not going to result in some sort of lifelong trauma. But then speaking to women in my life, I finally opened my eyes and I thought, you know what? I've been missing this point that when you are smaller than everybody, and especially if you don't have any training and you don't have any skills and you don't have confidence in your ability physically, that can be a very confrontational environment just to be out and about in an environment with, like a nightclub, for example. And that was a big wake up call for me. And it was something that I still struggled to process about how do I break down those barriers and say, look, I get it. And the answer was, I couldn't really get it. I had to get other women to I guess, to skill them up so they could teach for me, because I still couldn't really relate. I was still an outsider looking in. And that's why I think what you're doing is so important, because obviously you're not just teaching women, you're teaching men as well. But I think it's so important that a woman can look to someone who is accomplished like you and has the skills that you have, but still that she gets it.
Yeah, of course, because they're definitely gonna trust me a bit more than a male. Definitely, there's gonna be a bit less of, well, this doesn't work out, blah blah blah. I don't have the size and everything, and sometimes they they definitely need that a little bit more. I still think that as a male instructor, I always encourage people to just really give it a real try, right? Like, you also need to give yourself a chance as the instructor and everything, that maybe it could also work. Like, they actually need to experiment it. But definitely, which is also why I like mixed classes so much, because usually, yes, I will make a woman participate, but usually I will use a woman in a more psychological scenario, kind of part of the training, but then I will use a man for the most physical part, so they can right away see that it actually works, and then they can try it right away on a male. Again, that's in a context of mixed people. But even in women's self-defense program, what I like to do is, if I only have females, and again, most of the time, the contract that I accept for that is, with women shelters, family centers, and stuff like that, with people that I really feel like, okay, I do understand where you're at. It's normal, and I think I can bring a lot of that, a lot of my experience to your situation. So I go and everything, but even then, every time, after a while, I really look at them one-for-one, and I will often like offer offer my body to two women or something so they can try the stuff on me, because I'll be able to put a bit more resistance, and see also where they're at, because again, yes, I can show something on another woman, show that it works and everything, but if they can actually feel a bit more resistant, I do believe it makes a huge difference, because that's the thing. It's the reason why some women will feel the need to do a women's self-defense class when they really want to get to the point where they want to be able to defend themselves against a male and everything, is obviously because they fear men, right? For a while in their healing process, they fear them. But again, I even at that stage, I do believe that they need to have that process where they're already being a bit challenged, because otherwise they won't see the point. I've seen women, in those contracts where I'm teaching women's self-defense in shelter. They're so broken, so very broken, that I show one thing, the first thing I show, and they look at me and they're like, yeah, but this doesn't actually really work, right? Like we're gonna still end up being raped. And it's actually really hard to be with someone that no matter what you try to show them, they don't even want to try. Like that's enormous. And even though I'm also a female, they'll find the same excuse. Well, you're doing it on another female, it will work on a male. So it's always kind of, again, it's, as a teacher, you give as much as you can, but if the other person is not a recipient of what you're saying, it's not gonna work out. And the thing is, I really so deeply believe, and I know it's not a shared belief, but I do believe that self-defense program and course can heal you. I really do. And I listen, I've went to a lot of therapy in my life for various reasons, both as the victim, as, quite honestly, the bully. I went because I have a borderline personality disorder, so I went for that. I went for anger issue. I've went where there's no point denying it. When after being raped, I've went there, and again, it happened a couple of times, and every time it was just harder and harder, because it happened till the point where I ended up with the dojo that for me is like my home, my roots and everything. I've tried so many different martial arts, so many different women's self-defense course, and every time it still ended up there. So you feel even weaker, because you're like, I'm trying to do something and it's not working out. Obviously it's because the principle weren't there, right? It just wasn't based on good stuff. But still, it's just once I found the right place, that's really what made the huge difference for me. And I had bad experience with therapists that they didn't understand me or whatever. But once you actually figure it out, your issue, if I can say, and that you really find a specialist in what you're going through, it's amazing what they can give you. But even that, let's say that we put totally on the side the self-defense physical aspect of things. I could go to the best therapist in the world in, let's say, a borderline personality disorder. If the only work I'm doing to myself is when I'm in that room with that therapist, I'm not going to improve. That therapist is just supposed to give me knowledge. He's supposed to guide me. But in the end, I'm supposed to be the one that then go out of that door and do that in my daily life. Apply the stuff that I've just learned. He's not going to do that work for me. And I really do believe, especially in context where your issue is that you've been raped, you've been abused physically, especially physically, by someone. The main issue in the end is that you didn't have the physical strength to defend yourself. Because I believe so much in verbal de-escalation. I'm still a security worker. and I do law enforcement. I train people. I'm working for bodyguarding and stuff like that. Still, I have contracts for that, and I believe so much in verbal de-escalation. It saved my ass so many times. I can't even express it. I deeply believe in it, but I can tell you that there's a huge difference in that context versus, let's say, a rapist, because a rapist is not a good guy on a bad day. A rapist is literally a daily person who wants to have power over someone. So don't think that you can verbal de-escalate him. That's actually something at the core of someone. It's not just like, I have a shitty day, I want to rape someone. It's no matter how they feel during that day, they're gonna have that. So I do believe that self-defense course that are proper, that include everything that should be included, that it's not just kick the groins and you're gonna be safe, that actually involve everything else. That's actually the only way that someone who's been through rape that can get over that. To me, and again, I've been going through so many places, military, MMA, and whatever, since my first dojo. That worked out for me. And the only consistent thing that I've been told by people is how they, especially male, they were shocked by how I overcome things, and they couldn't understand it. They were like, in their heads, it's as if because you went through some trauma, you should be broken from the rest of your life. Yes, it should change you, but you shouldn't be broken. You shouldn't. If you tell me that, after like 10 years, you're still like, yes, you should be careful when you're walking in the middle of the night, but you shouldn't have that fear that makes you go through a panic attack or paranoia and stuff like that. And I think that's the difference between me and these people who still feel that, is that, yes, they went through therapy and stuff like that, which is much needed, very, very much needed, but they didn't take that final step. They didn't went all the way through, because if we compare that to someone who went through a car accident, you can't get over it unless in the end you go back and drive a car. That's how you heal from it. So of course, if you've been raped, I'm not inviting anyone to go in the middle of the street in the situation to get raped. That's not it. But the fair comparison to that should be that you train with a male that is not going to be patronizing you, that's going to go hard on you, and until until you actually made it sweat for it and hurt him a little bit and stuff like that.
You're raising so many good points that I have to like I'm like mentally taking notes so that I can follow up on different things. One of I fully agree with you, and what you say about de-escalation there is really important. It serves a purpose, and look, I guess if I'm known for anything locally, it's verbal de-escalation and be able to use that. That is essential for social conflict, for avoidable situations. But when it comes to predatory crime or asocial violence, when it comes to rape or murder, and I'm talking about real murder, not like manslaughter where someone or a fight that gets out of hand where someone accidentally dies, but I'm talking about real murder. Whereas a predatory planned crime, you can't de-escalate a planned action because the person isn't escalated. The person isn't emotionally escalated. It's planned, right? They're looking for a victim. You can't de-escalate that person any more than you can de-escalate a lioness who's hungry, right? You're not going to talk your way out of that situation. You have to either be a hard target so that you're not picked, which is obviously point number one, is try not to present an easy target, or you need to be able to fight. Like, you need to be able to fight away. But I think there's a missing piece there where sometimes we can have women that have all the physical skills, and I'm just using women because I'm talking to you. But we can have a woman who's got all the physical skills, who might be fit and strong and athletic and have trained, but hasn't quite got the psychological piece of allowing herself to act. And it's something that I first picked up when I was reading Gavin de Becker's work way back at the beginning of my career about female rape victims who didn't fight back because they didn't want to be rude. Like it's almost like a socially conditioned response that they're not to make waves. They're not to make. They don't want to be rude. They don't want to be seen as a bitch. Like, and they put themselves in harm's way, or they don't fight back because they just get paralyzed with the fear once everything has started. And I think there's this missing psychological component to be able to access those physical skills that they've built.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's and again, it's partly that's also why I do believe that therapy and everything is really important. But even outside of that, there's something that therapy is not gonna teach you about combat psychology. Like a therapist will not, and I've tried so many, and never in my life was I encouraged to, not let someone physically hurt me to the point where I will physically hit back. That's not something that they're gonna encourage. Like obviously, sadly, there's still these kind of stereotype. And even as a therapist, like there's some certain things that you can tell your client, that it's not you could be fired for that. So even if a person could either a male or a female, it doesn't even matter. It could be a male who has a daughter and will tell his daughter, like, if someone will ever to come to your house, be in your bed, like, I want you to stab them. Like, I don't want you to be raped. Obviously, even that person will never say that to their client as a therapist to a person that's been raped. Like, that's just not ethical, right? So even that aspect of fighting back is something that needs to be taught. And again, I do believe that for example, women who are really stuck inside that women's self-defense kind of atmosphere are still kind of women that you see that this fear and that this kind of belief is still kind of inside of them. It's like when my student tells me, oh, I can't hit hard, like I don't want to hurt them. From experience, it's really sad what I'm gonna say, and a lot of people are not gonna like me for it. But usually that type of people, it's not because they don't want to hurt their partner, it's because they don't want to be hurt back. It's not normal that you can't do something to your partner in a controlled environment. I have genetically anger issue. My borderline personality disorder makes that I go into psychos into certain condition, and even I never use the excuse, I don't want to do this, I don't want to get angry and hurt them bad. No, even I've never gone there. And even then, I do believe that it's something to learn, something that I deeply believe is still nowadays being kind of put on the side about all this self-defense world, is the emotional aspect. I love the fact that more and more we talk about verbal de-escalation and stuff like that, a bit more social stuff, but still the point of emotion within the person, I feel, is still really put on the side, because either it's, for example, self-defense programs that are based on anger, like just be angry like a monkey and hit, or it's supposed to be something taboo. So no, don't feel anything. You need to be cognitive. You need to be really sharp and have no emotion. Especially in situation like rape, I do think that controlled anger is so useful. Seriously, anger saved my life many times, many times. As a woman, as a human being, it's just it's something that it's people don't are not open enough about this, and especially someone who can hit genuinely because it's something that they've been so thought in life that it wasn't right or something. I do think that anger can bring that out, because oftentimes, you know, when people say, oh, the calmest person or actually the most dangerous because they have, you know, rage within or something. But there's a reason why it's so within, because they will actually never, unless they're encouraged to, train to, like, that rage is still gonna stay inside. It's not magically gonna happen and come up if needed. So even I think it was last week, I was teaching my group, which is a new group and a fitness group. I've been hired by someone to, you know, integrate self-defense, combative stuff to them. And there was a pair, which was a female and a male, and they're not a couple or anything, but they still knew each other for a while now. And the woman, either because of her culture or whatever, you can see that she's a bit more comfortable with violence. Like, she's never been into violence encounter, but you see that, especially in a controlled environment, she's actually fine with it. And then you look at the guy, and for the first few weeks, the guy often, you know, told me about how his father was a rough man and everything, and he said that because of that, he also was a rough man. And I can tell you this: last week, I noticed that it wasn't the case, you know, because even with all the posture that we've been practicing for a week and whatever, he was still backing off. He was still shielding in an inefficient way, and he was taking hits and he was falling on the ground and stuff like that. And you could see he was getting mad, but then you could see that he was getting mad in a way that he felt guilty about it. So then I had to pause and make like a general speech that was obviously more for him, right? But I had to tell them that ignoring your feelings, pretending that they're not there or trying to control them is not what is going to necessarily help you. You have to feel it. If you get mad at your partner, start screaming or whatever, you know what? People that I've seen done that, and that I've done it myself, if you put the effort in it, you're growing out of it. It's going to bring you something. You can't go past that and learn to control it unless you experiment it. So if you need to have a breakdown and start screaming like, you know, I'm sorry to say it, like a little bitch, and, you know, get mad at your partner and whatever, you know what? I'm pretty sure your partner is going to get over it. She's going to understand. You know, you need to feel it, and you need to actually make it useful. If some people have looked a bit into it, if we look even at Mike Tyson history, is his first coach. You know, he took that guy after he's been arrested, I don't know how many times, and he made something useful out of his anger. And he was a great fighter, right, at the beginning. And then he changed his coach. Then his coach, you know, bring him into, like, you know, prostitute and drugs and stuff like that. And then his career was ruined. And for the past couple of years, he just, like, you know, went back into that. He has his own little life. And he's a great man today. And you can see it because he actually went back into feeling his emotion. He didn't resolve anymore into drugs or distraction to not feel those. And I think that's something that people need to understand, is that it's your anger. And even his first coach, that's really something that he said. He basically said, you know, anger is not good or bad. You can either burn your house with it, or you can cook your meal. And I think to me, that's something that speaks so much, because again, I think there's a huge, that's what brought me out and of other people, is that I use anger rather than victimization to actually get me through stuff. Of course, I had a period where I really needed to learn to control it because it was too much, but it's okay. I think it's, you need to indulge yourself and accept that you're going to make mistakes, right? As long as you get better out of it.
Yeah. I think we shame people for emotion too much. And it is emotion that makes us human. that's what gives our life meaning. Like if you have a life without emotion, then what is it? Like you need to feel things. I think it's important that you can control them, and I think it's time when you know how to access it and how to how to focus it in the right for the right outcomes. I know you and I are both friends with Richard Dimitri, and a story he told me about one of his students back in the 90s, about how she was approached by a creepy guy at a bus stop, and obviously she was fearful, and the guy was very very insistent, but because she understood the psychology of the rapist, and this guy was, that she was able to kind of play along enough and sort of control her emotion and play the part well enough to lure him back into a public environment where she could then create the avenue for escape. And that for me was like, when he told me that story, I was like, oh wow, okay, there's so much more to this. There's a strategy involved. But I think it's not about she didn't feel the fear or she didn't feel the anger. It was about she recognized it, she knew what was going on, she had the knowledge to be able to play the part and get to safety. But I'm sure, had those strategies not worked, the ability to tap into that anger to fight would have been what saved her life. And I use this analogy all the time when I'm teaching, especially new female students that don't have confidence in their abilities, and they say, I could never defend myself against someone like you. So, well, you know what? Have you ever tried to give a 1 kilogram house cat a bath? Like, like you don't have to beat me in a 5-round MMA fight. You just have to get away, right? And I can guarantee that if I try and put my cat in a bathtub, it will get away, because that cat doesn't care about my feelings anymore. Right? That cat just wants to rip, claw, and shred until it gets away, and that's the psychology. Is like that concentrated rage. To just create a couple of seconds of separation is all that's required. But if you're worried about hurting someone's feelings, or you're worried about whether you are entitled to feel angry or scared or sad or anything else, you're going to create this massive mental block that stops you from being able to access those skills.
No, exactly. And even when, again, that contract that I just started, obviously the coach is just a fitness coach, right? He doesn't have any knowledge in self-defense or anything, which is also why he moved me up. And even at the beginning, he wanted to just offer that option to his female student. And then I was like, listen, I'm also teaching males. And we ended up with half. So I really have, like, let's say, 6 male and 6 female. Like, it's really equal and everything. And so that was, the first thing that I kind of had to, kind of remind him. But also, when he presented me to his group, he introduced me to say, that I'm going to also talk a lot about a psychology aspect of self-defense, especially with the COVIDs, right? We still can't touch each other in Montreal. So we need to do more like separate stuff or whatever. So it's actually a good opportunity to teach people maybe a bit more proxemics, work a bit more on the psychological level. But even then, he talked about how I'm going to basically supposedly teach them how to scream at people and insult them to make them stop. And then I had to right away, when he let me speak, I was like, listen, my goal is to teach you not to be not only not unaware, but to actually, be prepared if something happens. So if you notice a person behaving strangely near you, my goal is to end up being sure that you're not there looking at your phone, putting your music higher or something, but to actually lower it just in case, to maybe be in a posture that you can still see around, including that person, that threat, but also to understand that screaming at someone that's intimidating you, it's not necessarily the way to go. So you need to be, as my instructor will say, it's about spinal loading. So it's about being calm, being collected, even being civil at worst, but then be ready if something happens. So you want to talk someone down, you want to keep distance, you want to make them understand that you're not necessarily comfortable with what they're doing. But if they don't respect that, because some people, again, will, because some people are just fucking psychopaths, or serial rapists and they don't care, that's when you need to be ready. But that anger, you can't just ask it to be up in a second. You actually need to generate it. So it's about having it, feeling it, and controlling it until it's necessary. Because again, it's it really sucks to say, but again, from experience, I've seen people, being in the bus, having their ass grabbed by someone, and then the girl was super mad or anything. And I shit you not, people around were like, "You're exaggerating," because the guy was so calm, didn't react. She turned around, she started screaming at him, and he was like, "Oh, what's her problem? She's crazy." So it's again, it's not about, I'm not telling you to not share what you've been through or whatever, but definitely if your goal is to get away from someone at that moment, screaming in the middle of the metro is not necessarily what's going to get you out of it. You grab your ass. I think what you should do personally is first turn around, make distance between that person, and make sure that they don't come closer to you. Because otherwise, it's really sad to say, but people are going to point finger at you if the other guy is smart enough to, just have indifference. And that's the thing. Oftentimes when it's someone that is basically doing this on his daily basis, and it's not that he has to rape someone every day, but he can touch people in a way that they're not comfortable with every day. And they're gonna be used to it. They're gonna be used to just being indifferent, nonchalant, as if nothing happened. And it's something that, again, you kind of need to learn how to detach yourself from it, to not to think about your safety first. And it really sucked having your breast grabbed by your stranger in the middle of metro, and no one kind of acknowledging that. But it's sadly a reality. I can tell you that, especially my last rape event, it was from someone that I've trained with. And for a long, long, long time, I was only able to share that with another person that, truth be told, I shouldn't have shared that with that person. Because she was, at first she liked me and then she didn't. And once she started not liking me out of jealousy and everything, is also when I start kind of trying to maybe share it a bit more with the people around, because that guy who did that was still training with us. And, he was still trying to train with me every day. And every time he will pass behind me, he will like whisper into my ear and something. So of course, after a couple of months, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I had to try to share it with more people. And they did not believe me. They really did not. Even when that happened, I can tell you this, rape happens in public place. It really does. When that happened, it was in a bathroom cubicle from like a bar. And one of the girls that was with us, because on top of this, we were in a group of that training place, and she was there. And then she accused me of being a slut. Like, well, if you don't want to, I'm sorry, I'm going to use your word, if you don't want to fuck someone, then you shouldn't act like such a whore. Like, don't be surprised that they're going to, try themselves on you. And so, that kind of spread. And for a long, long time, even my closest person to me, for a while, they didn't believe me. And it's awful. It's awful. And that's with people that see you every day. Every day. And just because the other guy was calm, and because obviously after, just being raped and being told that, you feel guilty. You're like, yeah, well, maybe I actually did something to deserve that. And so you don't speak about it. And then they're like, why did you wait months to say it? And even that person that I said it like the same week then was using that against me. So it's really sad. It's really, really sad. But if you think in a context like that people justify it within the same family or stuff, don't be surprised that stranger in the metro are kind of gonna be BAs about it, right? So again, it's about knowing, having it, and in the end, again, maybe it's personal experience or whatever, but I can tell you that I really grow out faster from my trauma, from anger, than when it was from sadness. Because that one, and it's just say it wasn't the worst experience. It really wasn't. But because people around me didn't believe me, it brewed so much sadness. It took me years, like double the years, to overcome that one. It happened 6 years ago. I can say that maybe last year I started, uh, you know, feeling, I don't want to say better about this, but that I got over it. It took me 5 years. All the other times took me like maybe 2, 3 years, and I felt like, okay, no, I have power over my own body again. And this one really hurted badly. So I think yeah, it's just being more acceptance of your own emotion, because people around you are not necessarily gonna help you with that. So I think it's something that people should a bit more look into for themselves.
Yeah, and look, I think these are the aspects of self-defense that we don't talk about enough. I mean, it's not just about the incident. It's not just about what could you have done in the cubicle. Like that's one conversation for sure, but it's the years afterwards of managing relationships and broken trust and guilt and shame and self-doubt and self-blame and anger. And I mean, it's something that needs to be addressed with therapy, as you've said several times, but it all, as you also said, it's something you need to be able to know how to work on yourself, and to not, I guess, not rely on other people to be able to do it for you, as sad as that is, because you just don't know how everyone's going to process that situation. And I mean, everybody has different levels of knowledge and coping mechanism when it comes to how to help a friend who's been through that. And sometimes it's overwhelming, even as a friend, to be able to process it, and we don't handle it well. I mean, it pales in comparison, but I remember when I was 18, I had a friend who I'd known in school who called me to pick her up from what was called a family planning clinic, but essentially she'd had an abortion, and I was the only person she told. And it was very random for me because we weren't exceptionally close. I mean, we knew each other, we were friendly, but I wasn't a super close friend, but she felt safe me helping her. And I didn't know how to process that. And I didn't know how to help her because as an 18-year-old boy, I didn't know what I had to say and what I had to do and how do you help someone who's just been through this. And I probably didn't do a very good job. I mean, I don't think I messed it up terribly, but I look back on it and go, I don't know that I was the person she needed to talk to right then. So it can be very hard when someone opens up to you and says, "This happens to me." If you're so in your own head, it's going to be very hard to help someone through that. So I think if you're in the victim's point of position, you kind of need to take ownership of that and go, how am I going to get out of this? Like, how am I going to fix this? One thing I try and tell people that when I deal with people with PTSD regularly is that when someone abuses you, whether it's an assault, whether it's sexual assault, whether it's even just verbal abuse or ongoing abuse, psychological abuse, that's an inherently selfish act. I mean, they're saying that my needs are more important than your well-being, right? Or my desires are more important than your well-being. So it's an inherently selfish act. If you recognize it as being a selfish act, you can take power over it and say, you know what? Yes, you own those couple of minutes of my life. Now, those couple of minutes of my life, you're a part of that, and there's nothing I can do to change those couple of minutes. But I can change whether I think about it for the next 10 years. And I can change whether you get to stay in my head for the rest of my life or not. And so I encourage people to embrace therapy and to embrace that healing process as a way of taking back ownership of the rest of their life. You can't change what happened, but you can change how you live with it. And I think that's why what you're doing is so powerful, because you're sharing experiences that are incredibly traumatic, but you've come out the other side, and you're continuing to fight for it. And I think what I find really inspiring about this conversation as we wrap things up is that you're not playing the victim. You're not saying, treat me differently because I've been through this. You're saying, I'm going to kick your ass because I have grown through this, and I know who I am, and I know who I can be, and you're trying to help other people in the same way. And I think that's so incredibly powerful and necessary. And look, there are many other topics we could drill down on, but I think that's probably a really good point to leave the bulk of the interview on. So I just want to thank you for your honesty and your openness, and for the work you're doing. So I think it's incredibly important, and we need more women like you doing this. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you for the interview. It's really, it was great to be part of this, because obviously it's the first, real big opportunity that I get to talk about this. And, like I mentioned in the preparation of all this, it was kind of my goal to be a bit controversial about it, and on every side, because even I know that some women, are just gonna, again, choose the victimization side, and what I can say right now could be really hard for them to hear, right? Because it's obviously something that I openly talk about in any of my program or whatever. It's a bigger reality than people think. So being able to maybe share a bit more of that knowledge, and again, it's definitely a goal to encourage that, to encourage getting over it and not letting yourself be a victim, because it really begins with that. It really just begins with yourself, and no one can, make you any better or any lesser than yourself. So if you want to go further than it, you need to bring yourself further than it.
Yeah. All right, Savannah, if people want to book you or they want to find out more about you, where can they go to learn?
I have, if they have Facebook, I have a Facebook page. So it's Savage Hybrid Combat System. I also have a website, which is Savage Defense with a S.net. And that will be my main profile to look at, to have the most updates about what I'm about what I'm working on.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Savannah. We're going to go into the bonus round for our Patreon contributors. But for those that are leaving us here, thank you again.
Okay.
How awesome is that lady, Savannah Archambault? It took me a couple of practices to get the pronunciation right of the French name. But how awesome is Savannah? She shared so openly and so freely, and contributed such incredible information and insight, especially for those of us of the male gender who maybe struggle to see things through the female point of view. Make sure you check out the bonus content at Managing Violence on Patreon at patreon.com/Managing Violence for a whole bunch of bonus content from Savannah and all our other guests. Thank you once again for listening. Until next week, I'll talk to you next time.